Did you watch it? You know what it is. The salute to America. The salute to America on the 4th of July. It's been nearly 70 years since Harry Truman used the Lincoln Memorial as the backdrop for his Independence Day address to the nation. Can you imagine that? Donald Trump copying a Democrat? A number of political writers have speculated that the heavy emphasis on the military in this year's celebration was to emphasize the President's role as Commander-in-Chief. Maybe so. But maybe it was also a somewhat subtle sort of thing of a message. To watch that spectacle, the B-52 flyover, the Blue Angels doing their thing over the nation's capital. All the tanks at Fort Mac were put on trailers and sent to Washington to be parked so people could just see them. Maybe it was really a message. China, are you watching? Kim Jong-un, you're not the only one who can take over a city square. That's how we do things in this day and age. It's not new. All this posturing and political maneuvering is not new at all. It just takes different forms. I cite as my proof text for that the first lesson we heard from the Hebrew Scriptures. It comes from the Book of Kings. The events that are described in that history take place in the 8th century B.C. The time when Syria was the dominant power. Israel was struggling against its neighbors to maintain its independence. The threat of war was on the horizon. Syria's army, which was at that point in time the largest army in the world, it was under the command of a man named Naaman, a highly successful general. Unfortunately, Naaman's success did not make him immune to disease. He contracted leprosy. Leprosy for which there was no known cure. One day, Naaman's wife, having heard the diagnosis, wondering what was going to happen to the family, because the way you treated things like leprosy was to exclude them from human contact. She said something to her maid, a young Jewish girl probably captured in some battle somewhere. That young Jewish girl said, well, you know, there's a holy man in Israel who can cure leprosy. Naaman's wife was quick to tell him of this, and he was at that point that he would do anything to save himself. He goes to his king and says, my wife's maid says there is a holy man in Israel who can cure my disease. Help me. So Naaman's king does what any other ruler would do. He writes a letter to the king of Israel, introducing Naaman, and asks and seeks his help in putting Naaman in the hands of the prophet who can cure it. when you read it. It's really interesting. You can picture the king of Israel opening his mail, reading the letter, cussing and throwing things around the office, saying it's a trap. It's a trap. Nobody can cure leprosy. But then he's heard the tales about Elisha and his powers. And the letter says that Naaman is on his way to Israel, on his way to be cured by the holy man. The interesting thing is, not much has changed. Trump writes a letter to the president of China asking for him to intercede to set up a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And with a name like that, I mean, come on. In return for which, China starts playing with tariffs. How are you going to live? It's the way we do things. Kings write to kings. Rulers write to rulers. Favors are sought and favors are paid for. This was written in the 8th century BC. And the story is played out this morning on this 4th of July weekend. Maneuverings with not only North Korea, but Iran, China. It still goes on. Naaman arrives bearing gifts for the king of Israel. We do that today. Our president gives something to the president of Russia, and vice versa. And then Naaman's entourage is led to Elisha's house. He's looking forward to the cure. The problem is Elisha won't even come out. He sends a servant out with the message, go bathe in the Jordan River 7 times. And Naaman goes ballistic. Love the comment, we got better rivers in my country than here. I mean, after all, the Jordan dries up about once a year. He leaves in a huff, cussing Israel, cussing Elisha, everybody involved. Who saves the day? His servants. His servants. We don't even know their names. Lowly servants who point out to him the obvious. If he had told you to jump off of a high cliff, wouldn't you have done it? What's wrong with being clean? A little water can't hurt you. It's the servants who save the day. And Naaman bathes the 7 times in the Jordan and comes up with the skin of a newborn. It's a wonderful story. One of my favorites from the Hebrew Scriptures. And part of its joy is to see those dynamics played out in our own day and age. Just the names of the people have changed. What would you do to be cured? Mighty leader, what do you have to lose? Now the picture from the Scriptures in this morning's lectionary turned to Jesus addressing a crowd of followers. We're told there's 70 of them, and they've got a mission. They are to go out to the countryside, to the towns and the villages, and they are to proclaim good news. Gospel. Good news. Tell those people in those towns and villages that they are the Father's beloved ones. Tell them that there is something called forgiveness for their sinfulness and their failures. Tell them that there is nothing in this world that can separate them from God's ownership of them. Tell them they are blessed. Tell them they are blessed. Their instructions are pretty simple. Travel light. No change of clothes, just what you have on your back. Stay one night wherever they'll let you sleep. Eat what is set before you. If someplace rejects you, simply shake the dust off your feet and move on. Messengers of good news. A small army, if you will. Far different army than Naaman commanded. A far different army than the leaders of this world command. But an army of which we are a part. And the news has not changed. The message is still the same. You belong to the one who has created you. There is nothing that you can do to separate you from that relationship. Unfortunately, the word saint has taken on an unintended meaning. In our contemporary culture, we refer to someone as a saint who is that special person in history, or that special person who, because of their personality, that we are in envy of. But they're still saints. Because ultimately saints are the ones that Jesus not only sent out, but the ones to whom they were sent. But you belong to God. There is nothing you can do that will separate you from God. There is nothing that God cannot forgive. It is an interesting fact that in our services of baptism, confirmation, it's even in the wedding service, and it's certainly in the ordination liturgy in the prayer book. You can look it up. There is that place in the service and where the congregation, when all of us, you and me, clergy and lay, are asked a question. Will you support the persons who are being baptized, confirmed, married, or sent out? Will you uphold this person or persons in his or her commitment? That's what we're called to do, to uphold what God has committed. Anne Lamott, who is a contemporary writer of religious books, has a little book out called Traveling Mercies, and I commend it to you. In it there is an episode from her childhood that has helped shape her journey in faith. She writes that when she was 7 years old, her best friend in the little town where they grew up got lost. Totally disoriented. Could not tell you where home was. She was frantic. Began crying, walking the streets, looking for familiar landmarks, something that would point the way home. A cruising squad car spotted her, and the officer stopped and asked her what was wrong. Why was she crying? And she said she was lost. Put her on the passenger seat of his squad car and began riding her around, up one street and down the other, until she found a familiar landmark. It was a church, her church. She turned to the policeman and said, "You can let me out now, this is my church. I can always find my way home from here." And that is why I've stayed close to one since. Beloved, you're in the Army. Did you know that? You're in the Army. An army of saints that has graced history from the days of those first followers who were sent out to proclaim good news. And you too, and me, are God's very own.